the village I grew up in was lovely. It was like a quite a picturesque village, with Northamptonshire sandstone buildings. Old, it was an old village with a lot of history. Um, and I ended up working in East Haddon a lot. My mum ran a organic vegetable box scheme, so she used to grow organic vegetables and then deliver them in the village. So which was really sweet. So she used to have a polytunnel in a field with her friend, and I spent a lot of time there as a child too, growing up in the sort of helping out in the polytunnel. It was a really nice experience because although I'm not hugely into the sort of growing fruit and veg, um, I sort of was immersed in the sort of horticultural side of things quite early, which was really nice. It was a really nice sort of a nice introduction. Coten Manor, in Coten. It was they used to have a bluebell woodland. So it was a huge sort of a woodland with beech trees, and then under the canopy in sort of April, May time, you get these amazing bluebells come up, all British bluebells. And I remember going there as a child and collecting wood lice and things like that with my friends, and it was a really nice spot to sort of grow up in. Well, I didn't love school very much, and I was sort of eager to do something quite practical. Um, and I've always felt like gardens are a nice, safe space, and I've always loved being in a garden. And then as a child, I had a very sort of keen love for bird watching, and I loved birds. And then I wanted to sort of create habitat for birds, and this is in my mum's garden in East Haddon, and creating habitat for species that were on decline, and just bird watching in general I love doing, and still do. Um, but firstly, it was just to create habitat for species that were in decline and things like that. Um, but then so so I was sort of like very interested in gardens always. And then when I finished secondary school, I found that I could do horticulture, like as a degree. Um, and I thought that would be ideal. And it just all fell into place really. I felt really lucky because I've got friends now that are still, doing jobs, but they still don't know what they want to do. But I found it so quickly, and I feel so lucky. I worked for a landscaper for while I was studying horticulture at university in Nottingham. I worked for a landscaper, so I was sort of learning the trade then. And then after I finished university, I went to Hawaii, and worked on the National Tropical Botanical Garden there, for a couple of months. It was like an internship. Um, and then after that internship, I then went to and sort of started up on my own, and I did a garden in East Haddon. Um, and it was a garden it was quite inspired by, maybe slightly inspired by Pete Udolph's work. Um, and it was sort of prairie style planting with a nice, because again, like a sense of place is quite important to me. So this was a really old uh house in Northamptonshire, beautiful thatched cottage, and I wanted to make sure that all the materials sort of linked. So we used like clay pavers, uh, and then made a nice pathway through, and then planted all the sides it's a really nice project actually. I'm really proud of it, and it's one I go and visit often. I worked as a gardener for years before I went to university, and I forgot to mention that. So from the age of like 14 to 15, oh well, 14 or 15, I can't remember quite. I was working with a gardener at a house in Northamptonshire, in Brampton, called Hillcrest House, and he sort of taught me the maintenance of a garden. Um, and that was really interesting because I sort of straight away, before I studied garden design, I had an insight into how a garden is maintained and how um, the love and the sort of gardening is linked with garden design. So you've got it. So I sort of, luckily, as I was working there, I sort of always consider the maintenance of a garden and how it's going to look in the future years. And I think for me, it's really important for a garden to look timeless. I don't want to I'm not into the sort of fashion of garden. It's more a timeless garden um that will always look right and in its setting. Landscape design, I personally would consider that more on a larger commercial scale, whereas garden design I see as more domestic. One of the things that I do I build all the gardens myself, so it's really important. Like I like to be on site for that whole process, and I think being able to do that as a garden designer and builder is it sort of it makes decisions on site that you wouldn't necessarily make on a piece of paper. And I think that again links with the sort of landscape architecture or landscape design and garden design. It's sort of like you're more, I think this is just, my own thoughts. I feel more involved in the project as a garden designer, and I'm see it through the whole way. Especially in the UK, because we love gardens so much, but I think now people have realized or not just now, but for several years, we've realized the importance of gardens, not only to help soften buildings, but for mental health reasons. They bring so much, and they set they sort of set the standard before you enter the house or before you look at the house. They almost set the standard, I think. And it's like, if you see a well done garden, you're going to go into a well done house. I think that we have seen a change in gardens linking with landscape architecture and architecture. People are now looking at how they all link together, and I think it's a really important thing, and it's about time. It's easy to spend all the budget on the building, but then the outside look rubbish, and it's a shame. Surrounding buildings, the history. I always look at the history of the site of where we are, so that's always really handy because you can really pick up on what materials you should or could be using, and just the history in general is fascinating to look at. And also, like I said, it allows you to sort of think about what planting you might use, or if it's so I work in London a lot, and if you're sort of there's so much history here, and even in just like, there was a garden down the road where there was a guy called the Mole Man lived, and he used to just dig tunnels. This bloke, he used to just dig tunnels in his house and just went down miles. And it's things like that you can link. So you could mound soil to look like the Mole Man has been, or there's sort of tongue-in-cheek ways you can do it, and also like serious ways you can do it. But it's just making things look right. I always want things to look like they've always been there, you know. Um, I think that's key is to look timeless and um yeah, to make things look like they've always been there. I don't want things to look new. I think new is not necessarily the answer. I want things to look settled and like they've been there a long time. When I'm visiting a client for the first time, I like to just sit in the garden for a bit, see how it sort of works and how it feels, and then that to me then makes me think of like where I'd want to sit if it was my garden, like where am I sort of drawn to? What's a nice spot to sit in for both, morning, evening, and midday? Like where would I want to be in the garden? Um, and so just sitting and observing where the shadows are, like where the maturity, like so here we've got this amazing like old walnut tree in the garden, and that to me was straight away like I want to be near that tree. If I'm sitting down, I want to be there. um I want to be underneath that tree, um because why not? I mean, it's beautiful. And again, like that, yeah, that sort of thing. So I just sort of, and then sketch it up, see how it feels. And then again, because I'm building the gardens, slight decisions, and I'm here all day, for weeks on end, and I'm able to sort of see if it might change a little bit, or I might say, you know what, on the design it was here, but let's move that a little bit over here. And I think that's a key part of my process is building the gardens, and I'm able to make decisions whilst just observing. In the past, I suppose people have wanted to manicure their lawns and keep topiary, and that still has its place in a garden 100%. But I think we've learned the importance of allowing things to just be a little bit. And I think that's really important for not only aesthetic reasons, because I think it looks great. Um, I think as well it um, is amazing for environmental reasons. It's really important that we're leaving those seed heads on. We're leaving the dead upright flower heads because that's a place for an insect to hibernate. It's really important that we're doing that. We're letting leaves just land and leaving them because they'll decay and then they'll help the soil. I think now, like I've noticed, especially in London, you can work alongside an architect, and architects understand the importance of the whole picture of the garden linking with the house. And I think I've really seen a change in that since I've sort of started. In London, it's always site access, so that you're always going through the house to bring in materials. So you're limited on, yeah, site access. So often, like at the moment, I'm currently on a garden in Camden, which I'm working on, and the site access is through the bottom window, and then through the kitchen, and then through the back doors, so because there's no side access. So that's something that's always a very practical problem, but is something that's a real sort of hardship in London is the access and bringing materials through. Um, but again, that's also why I like to um, sort of work with what I've got. I don't want to be, I never really get rid of soil, because I like to keep soil, and it allows me to sort of create these sort of mounds in the garden. So, so I sort of bank it up and then plant into it. So you get this sort of natural, because a lot of the time you in London especially, but you see like flat level gardens, and that is not what would naturally occur. And if you're trying to create like a natural garden, it's never going to be level because in nature nothing's really level. You sort of get these nice mounds, and again it creates like free draining soil on top, and then you might get a slightly wetter bit at the bottom, and it means that we can use plants differently. You're not just left with the aspect and then a flat bit of soil. We've got a north facing side, a south facing side, and then a wet bit, a hot bit, and sorry, a wet bit and a free draining bit. And I think that's a nice way of sort of working with what we've got. And again, I try and do that with the stone as well, if possible. Use existing materials on site and working with that. And you could like cutting cobbles up so they're thinner, or you know, just using what's already here is important to me. So a garden that I'm really inspired by in the UK, I love the Lost Gardens of Heligan. Coten Manor is always close to my heart too, which I mentioned earlier, which was probably the first garden I ever visited as a child. And but I think those gardens work because they work where they are. I'm not trying to recreate another garden. I think every garden is unique to its own space. So I'm never going to try and recreate one, because the gardens have their own atmosphere. I'm not sort of going to recreate something, but I'll be inspired by it, definitely. Or use like maybe little touches they did there, maybe, but it's every garden is unique to its own space, I think, and where it's situated, and you know, I think that's sort of important. I don't want to recreate stuff. I'm currently working on one in Camden, which is going to be a lovely garden, I think. Really excited about it. It's a very shady garden. So at the moment, we're, as you know, midday in the UK, and it's about 30 degrees today, and it is nice, and like I've got a jacket on, I've got a shirt on. It's nice. It's like nice and cool. Um, so that's the one I'm working on at the moment. So it'll be nice planting. It'll feel like a woodlandy, which is really nice, especially because in the city it gets so hot, and it'll be nice to sort of come back to it in, after a long day at work, come back to a nice sort of green, rich like tapestry. I might be going up to Northumberland to do a garden there, which will be good. I've got two in Brockley, one in central London, and then there's loads. I'm booked up.